Well, welcome to our Declutter podcast. I'm Patrick Latham, your podcast host. And in this podcast, we're talking about decluttering our lives. You've probably seen some of those shows or documentaries about decluttering your personal space or your house. Here we're talking about decluttering our lives. I can remember watching the show Hoarders. That's one of my favorites because it always makes me feel really good about myself. So in Hoarders, you see people with these really ridiculously cluttered living spaces. We're thinking here about decluttering our lives from busyness, battling busyness, taking back our time, and pursuing our purpose. And today I'm joined by Kim Lewis and Glenn Jordan. Kim works with Bartow Family Resources in Bartow County, Georgia, and Glenn Jordan is a Chick-fil-A owner and operator. And as I planned for this podcast, I read a lot of the books that are out there, a handful of the books that are out there on busyness. I'd read on busyness and time management in the past and found that a lot of books, even Christian books, are super practical in nature, which is good. We need those tidbits and truths, practical ideas. But there's not many that are theological in nature that kind of take the Christian view to say, who are we as human beings? What does God say about time? And what does God say about life in general? And so then studying this topic from that angle, I began to think about certain concepts, God, time, how he made us. And then I came to this idea of purpose. And, to really live life well and to live an uncluttered life, you need to understand your purpose in life. We get presented with so many opportunities. Yeah. It seems like modern society, we have an infinite list of opportunities of things we could do, things we could be. Just think about hobbies, all the hobbies you could embrace. So, for me, looking at Scripture, purpose was a big deal. You've got to start before you can plan your time to know your purpose. And then I started to think when it came to these interviews, who are some people I could interview that I know who seem to live with a sense of purpose. So you two came to my mind. I really appreciate you joining us for this podcast. And perhaps we could just start like this, just a little bit of an introduction. I'll allow you to do that. And we'll allow Kim to go first. Ladies go first. And maybe just introduce yourself. Introduce two things, introduce yourself, and then just maybe talk a little bit about your purpose in life related to the organization you work with.
Right, sure. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for having us today. I know Glenn and I were chatting, and neither one of us feel like we're an expert at this by any means. I mean, life is always a struggle, right? But we certainly are honored that you ask. We appreciate the opportunity to share. So my name's Kim Lewis. Married to my husband, Jeff, for 34 years, 3 amazing young men. I can't believe they're all grown, but those are my first priority or certainly were as a mom, bringing them up. But I'm blessed and grateful to be able to serve as the executive director at Bartow Family Resources, which, as you know, Patrick, started here at Tabernacle 36 years ago as the Crisis Pregnancy Center. So it's just been an honor to see it grow. Served on the board for 10 years and became educated in what the center did and just developed a heart for that. And then I've been on staff for about 10 years, so about 20 years in all, just to see what God's done. And as far as purpose, I mean, I never thought that I would be leading the center or serving in this capacity. Just asked the Lord to use me. And as I was making sort of that transition, I was grateful to be able to stay home with my boys when they were young. And Jeff and I had talked about that, and was able to volunteer and serve in some other roles, but primarily being with them. And so when they didn't need me as much and everybody was moving up to college and high school and middle school, just praying through, okay, Lord, I'm a little more available now. So how do you want to use me? And literally the opportunity just came to be on staff. And so it's not like I had this grand vision of serving in this role. It just happened as I said yes to the next thing over time, if that makes sense. And certainly now as a beautiful space in my life, and I feel a great sense of purpose in helping these moms and dads, whether it's an abortion-minded mom or whether it's just a family that's struggling for diapers, wipes, formula. They need a listening ear. They need someone to care. It's a privilege.
That's good. I'd like to press into that just a little bit more. We'll get to you in just a second, Glenn, but something I think you said there is really interesting, that you kind of didn't seek this purpose.
Right.
I found when, even going back to my college year, somebody gave me a book. I think it was actually a Christian book, but it was on, finding your purpose in life. And it really kind of perhaps was in alignment with what we see in modern Western world American thought, that if you want to be a success in life, you start with the end in mind, and then you kind of reverse engineer it and kind of craft your goals, and you incrementally work towards this purpose. But when you talk to a lot of Christian people who the Lord has used in mighty ways, you get this a lot of times. Like, this was never my plan.
Never.
I just sought to follow the Lord. I can remember a pastor told me one time when I was in seminary, he said, I've just tried to pray, Lord, use me.
Yes.
The world perhaps teaches us, come up with your own designs and then reverse engineer it, work hard, fulfill your dreams.
Right.
But maybe the Christian way with purpose is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6.
That's right.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths.
Completely.
So perhaps sometimes our busyness is fueled by, we have this worldly mindset that I've got to do it. And if it is to be, it's up to me. We've got our plans, and we want God just to get on board with them and carry them out. Maybe we can talk about more of that later in a moment, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But Glenn, give us a little bit of self-introduction here and talk about how you found your purpose in the chicken business.
Which we all love.
Yes.
It's funny. I got graduated from college, and I had worked at a Chick-fil-A in high school and during breaks during college, and the operator that I worked for had a nervous breakdown. He had Tourette syndrome. Back in the 70s, nobody could pronounce Chick-fil-A. Nobody knew what it was. It was just more than hamburgers. So if you wanted somebody to come in, you had to give them a free sample, and then they would try it.
Was this a mall unit?
This was a mall store.
For the
Decatur,
freestanding?
Alabama. Yeah. So when I went to college, the last thing that I wanted to do was be him. I had no intentions of running a store. He had taken me to the home office, which, if you've never been, you walk in and there's like harps and angels singing, and they eat really well, and it's just one of the coolest places on earth. So that's where I wanted to work, and I applied for 3 different jobs there, and they told me, you're just not quite qualified, but all your test scores say running a store might be a good idea for you. And I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. So I kind of left with my tail tucked between my legs. And after, I think, 95 rejection letters, I said, why don't I go try Chick-fil-A? I'll do it for a year. If I hate it, I'll at least have something on my resume that maybe can get me another job. And I never looked back. I absolutely love working with young people. I love the craziness. I'm a hyperactive, can't stand to sit still, which I'm trying really hard right now. So it fits me perfect. The environment in a fast food restaurant fits who I am and fits the way I'm wired. But I feel like my number one strength finder gift is responsibility. So I want to be there for everything. I want to be responsible. I want everything to go well. I want people to be treated right. And the first store that I ran had 8 people. It had 2 daytime people and 3 that would work one night and 3 that would work the next night. So managing 8 people, managing that business, which was about $300 a day in sales, was pretty easy. But that has, I don't want to share numbers, but it is unbelievably different now. So I was forced to learned to declutter my life and to trust people at a level that I wasn't comfortable with. And that's the only way I've survived.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have a wife. Her name is Susie. I've got 2 kids, Ben and Sam. Ben's 25 and Sam is 21. Mm-hmm. So they're lots of fun. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of funny. When Ben was born, my wife had some complications afterwards. So I literally I went from working probably 8 or 9 hours a day to 2 or 3 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And I actually called the home office and said, hey, I don't know if I need to quit or what, but I have to take care of my wife and my child. Mm-hmm. And they were like, that's fine. Mm-hmm. In fact, we want you to do that. Mm-hmm. But it forced me to trust people and to hire people to do my job so I could be available to my family. So that was that's most of my experience with this subject. It's not something that I chose. Right. It was something that I couldn't live without. Wow. I had to change or die trying.
Wow, that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's good. And I think that's helpful for you to share because a lot of listeners and a lot of people who are tuning into this podcast, both the sermon aspect and the interview aspect, are probably listening out of a point of need. Mm-hmm. They feel weighed down by busyness. They want to change. One thing I've appreciated through this study and through the interviews is people who have just been raw and, real, that they don't have this mastered. This is kind of something we've all struggled with, and maybe it's a lifelong struggle. Mm-hmm. I appreciate what you brought up about trust. You talked about trusting employees. Yeah. Do y'all find that trust is at the heart of this busyness thing?
Yes.
Big part.
Yeah, that we perhaps don't trust the Lord, so we overextend ourselves, reaching for significance and security. Yeah. We don't trust others, or we don't trust ourselves. So good stuff. So let's talk about purpose a little bit more and move a little bit further. So it's one thing to talk about purpose, to have purpose, but how do we let purpose direct our lives? I've heard purpose compared to a North Star. My wife and I, we were on vacation recently, and it was raining at the beach. We were looking for things to do because typically don't go to the beach when it's raining. So we found out about a local planetarium, where they do the show on the dome, top of you, pitch black room. And so this show we went to see was about showing the stars, and it gave a lot of the history of the North Star and how ancient mariners navigated based on the North Star. And purpose is often defined as a North Star in our lives. Like when you know what your purpose is, it gives direction to your life. So Tim Challies has written a book that I recommend to our listeners called Do More Better. I got this. I was kind of surprised. Like, that sounds like kind of worldly, earthly productivity book, hustle, cram as much as you can into your life. But he actually takes a Christian view, and he promotes this thing called purpose. Other word that's used for this is mission, an organizational thought. You have a purpose or mission statement. So he said this in his book, Tim Challies: decisions are simplified when you know your mission in life or your purpose. So could you give kind of testimony, maybe we'll start with you this time, Glenn, about how purpose directs your life from everything to family, time management, money, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. In our family, we love to support ministries, but there are hundreds, thousands. I mean, there's so many different places you can support. And I want to support at a substantial level. I don't want to divide $100 by 100 different organizations. So we have to think about what is it that is really passionate in our hearts about? What do we feel like God's put us on earth to do? What fits? And that weeds out, I hate to say it, but it weeds out, 95% of them. And I don't have a problem telling people that's just not where my heart is,
It's good.
That's it makes those decisions so much easier. We still struggle because there's still a lot of different choices, but I think it's, if you do pick the right place to support or to volunteer, whatever, and it aligns with your purpose, then it's not work, it's not drudgery, it's not something you dread. You look forward to either, writing a check or standing next to them, baling sandbags or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered the question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that does. You're thinking in a specific domain there. And we're going to expand on that a little bit later, but generous contributions to a nonprofit or whoever that's asking for support, but your purpose helps you make that decision. So, but we can play out that same scenario in all domains of life, whether it's who we spend time with,
Right.
What meetings we accept, what hobbies we pursue, what opportunities we say yes or no to. Because the reality is, in life, every yes means you're saying no to a lot of other things.
Right.
And every yes means there's probably, if you're already a busy person, something you're going to have to remove from your schedule in order to make that thing happen. So I think that's a great example. And I think for our listeners, you just have to think on your level in your life, where do you feel the creep of busyness? Where do you feel that anxiety, that stress? Where are you having a hard time saying no? And can you kind of apply the same principle Glenn's applied to generosity? Right. Good stuff. So what about you, Kim? How does your purpose, we're trying to fight against busyness. How does your purpose or mission serve as a North Star in life?
Well, I certainly appreciate the question, and it's really a little comical because I feel like it's something I struggle with all the time, and I'm probably one of the worst people to ask how to declutter your life and not be busy because it's just a constant, it's just a struggle, and so I don't by any means have some great revelation other than truly, I mean, this is not meant to be like a boxed cliche, but just if the purpose of our lives is to know, love, and serve God, just kind of boil it down to that, then you're just asking, I'm trying to ask, okay, Lord, so right now I'm in this season, and for this season, I feel like this is what you call me to, because we see that seasons can shift, right, and change, and so I think it's knowing, okay, in right now, this, and this are priorities. It's kind of like you've seen the illustration of the clear vase, and if you put the
You said vase because your husband's a French speaker, right? Jeff is learning French.
He is inspired by Pastor Patrick, who is fluent in French. If you do not know, my husband sits every night with his Duolingo, and it's so great. But if you put the tiny rocks in, you'll never make room for the big rocks. So it's asking yourself, okay, what are the big rocks? Well, right now, my mom her health is aging. Her health is declining. I mean, she's doing okay, but at 82, maybe I need to be prioritizing that 2-hour drive a little more than once a month. So, okay, that's a big rock. So I'm going to make sure and look at my calendar. For me, it's calendar. If it's on the calendar, then that's where my focus is going to be. And, just passing somebody in the hall and saying, hey, let's get together. Well, that's not on the calendar. I'd like to do that, but if it's on the calendar, it's not going to happen. So, it's prioritizing what goes on there. And then looking at that a week out and going, okay, is this really, Lord, does this need to shift around? What are my priorities? My kids, of course, my husband, my church, and then my role at BFR. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's just hard to do a whole lot more than that. And so it's just knowing these are the things I can focus on and try to do well. Or if I begin to just say yes, then my effectiveness, I'm exhausted, I'm not on my best game, I'm not thinking clearly, I'm not planning ahead because I'm just living moment to moment. And so those are the things that kind of cloudy the water for me, and I have to be careful. So if that kind of makes sense, just yes. I think thinking about the season you're in for me helps a lot because nothing is forever. We don't know what God has next for us, but I think trying to honor where He's put you for now.
That's good. We'll come back to that concept of seasons And you touched on another concept there that we want to unpack in a moment. But let's just stick on mission statement for a moment. So you both work for really good, solid organizations. And I imagine both of these organizations have mission or purpose statements. Can you state those off the top of your head and share those?
Yes.
Go ahead. I'll be remembering
You
mine.
think
while
about
you're-
Hey, I've used
Well-
yours in a sermon here
Okay,
recently.
So good. Well, funny that you should ask, because we decided a mission statement was so long and wordy, so we just kind of drilled it down to our purpose. And our purpose at Bartow Family Resources is to help at-risk, vulnerable families find the pathway to life.
Okay. That's
Whatever
good.
life looks like, spiritual life, physical life.
Yeah, we're using here in this. We're using mission and purpose kind of as interchangeable
Right.
words. I think that's great. So, you
Chick-fil-A's is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us, and to have a positive impact on anyone that comes in contact with Chick-fil-A.
okay, cool.
It's awesome.
So
Yeah, that's good.
big deal.
So yeah, that's the man as a leader. You got to know the mission statement, right?
Yes,
The
you do.
purpose statement. So ours at Tabernacle is we say we exist to connect people to their ultimate purpose in life in Jesus Christ. And so for organizations, mission statements or purpose statements are important. You know, one thing that may be helpful, and I'll give full disclosure, I haven't done this yet, but one thing in studying the literature is that a personal mission statement may be helpful. Have either one of you, no pressure here, but have either one of you thought about that or kind of have something articulated in your head?
Well, if I might jump in, Glenn, just what comes to my mind is our internal mission statement. It's really our core values more than a mission statement at BFR, but I felt like they were mine personally. And it's really simple. It's just love, joy, and excellence. And so we want to serve out of the fact that we love because God first loved us, you know, and then we want to express that through joy and serving others. And then we want to do that with excellence. So sort of personal and work related.
For me, it's growing people. We see the business as a tool to grow people. All the problems
Yeah.
are opportunities to grow people. And then my life is unlock and ignite potential in people.
Oh, that's good.
I love watching people
Yeah.
and going, this is really weird that you're good at that. Like
Yeah.
nobody does that. You need to dig into that. You know, the way they fold their trash or the way they do their hair, or, you know, how detailed are you or how not detailed are you? I love looking at all those aspects and trying to help people figure out what their purpose is and what, you know, direction they need to go in.
Good. That's good stuff. So I like that. I like that you've got a mission statement, purpose statement, given some thought to it. I've been thinking on it. You know, I kind of know big picture. I'm called to be a pastor, a husband, and a father, you know. But I think this is something that could really help our listeners. You know, when it comes to battling busyness, you've got to, as we've already said, know thyself.
Right.
You know, the ancient Greek statement. And you're going to have a hard time of having a filter that helps you say yes and no to things appropriately if you don't know why you're alive and why you exist, how God's wired you, and what your unique purpose is in life. You know, the Westminster Catechism that kind of has that statement, what is the chief purpose of man? To glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So that statement perhaps is popular because it gives people kind of that North Star. This is big picture. But then beyond that, when we consider our gifts, our opportunities, how the Lord seemed to wire us and where he sovereignly placed us, then we can kind of zoom in more on a specific purpose statement for our lives. So I would encourage that to our listeners. If y'all were to counsel someone on, okay, you're speaking to someone who's younger, maybe it's one of your employees who's in high school, or a college student who's volunteering at BFR, or maybe it's someone middle-aged who's just seemed to lose their way, and we've met those people before later in life. I feel like all my life up to this point I've had no purpose. How would you counsel someone if you were kind of leading them to help find their purpose? We'll start with you, Glenn.
Well, I hope that this person that I'm talking to, I have some relationship with, because I can speak into things that I see, what, you know. But I think if you ask enough questions, like, Like what is it you do that time just is not an issue, that the clock just runs and you don't even know it? What is it you do that you just have endless amounts of energy for that doesn't
Does eating
drain you?
Chick-fil-A count?
I guess it could.
Absolutely.
Do y'all have taste testers?
Yeah, we need one of those. But yeah, I think once people, it's not that complicated. It really is not. And if you look, I think God reveals to you. Matter of fact, I went through a midlife crisis when I was about 40, and I said, I'm quitting Chick-fil-A. I want to be a missionary or a youth pastor or maybe a high school teacher, but I'm just sick of business. And so they sent me to this life planner up in Michigan, and we spent 3 days together. He asked me a million questions, and then at the end of 3 days, I said, so which should I be, a youth pastor, a teacher, or a missionary? And he was like, I think you'd be crazy to stop doing what you're doing right now. Based on everything that you've told me about your life, all of the turning points point towards what you're doing right now. You just need to change your perspective. Like, go to work every day thinking, I'm a missionary.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a youth pastor. I'm a teacher. So that fits in with my purpose. So I think it's, if you look back, if you could record your life, especially the turning points, I think you'll see what your purpose is and what God's trying to do to show you that.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea of, how'd you say it? What you do where time seems to just fly, because that's tapping into what your passions are, what you're passionate about. And I think it was Maxwell. Maxwell may have borrowed it from someone else, find something you love to do and do it well enough till someone pays you to do it. That's a way to find your purpose.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I was attending a small church in Middle Georgia, and there was a man who ended up discipling me, and I didn't know he was discipling me at the time, but he was like, I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And he's like, I got 2 questions. What are you good at? What do you like to do? And it's kind of country wisdom, but it really is at the heart of purpose.
Yeah.
And I think you could add to that also, and this was present in what you were just sharing, what are your opportunities? God is a God of open doors. When he has a purpose for you, you see that in the life of Paul, he'll open doors.
Absolutely.
So now we don't walk through all doors, but maybe it's a good question to ask. What are you good at? What do you like to do? And what seem to be the open doors in front of you? Good input. Anything you would add to that? How would you counsel someone, a young lady who's maybe volunteering with BFR and looking for her purpose in life?
I would just add one thing, Patrick. I think I would ask her, what have you been through? Because a Bible teacher once said to me, you cannot amputate your history from your destiny. I don't mean like mystical destiny, but God's will, God's plan.
Gotcha.
Because so often we want to just turn our back and walk away from whatever. Not that everyone has a traumatic childhood or, some horrific experience in their background, but a lot of people do. And that becomes the driving force behind why they want to be a counselor, or why they want to be, a leader XYZ of whatever kind, or write a book, or, because they're desiring to help others that have maybe been where they were. I know we just got finished doing a series of What's Your Why with our staff at BFR. And so every morning a different staff member took a turn to tell us your why. And I won't go into all that. It was so powerful and very revealing as to why so many of them are with us. One of my nurses, one of our RNs, because of her history and what she'd been through, said just the other day, I get to sit across from myself and minister to her every day. There's your purpose.
Yeah. Wow.
There's your purpose.
That's pretty good. So you can look at the old statement, your past doesn't define you, in a different way here.
Right.
Your past can define you.
That's right.
In a sense that your past may be preparation.
That's right.
For how the Lord wants to use you and your purpose. So good. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the stuff outside of work. So family, if we think about the containers of things that could be outside of work, I mean, the biggest thing we do is sleep, right? And then, but family and normally hobbies or recreation. It's, amazing to me whenever I've had opportunity to counsel men who kind of have a breakdown, whether morally, emotionally, and they're at this crisis. One of the things I've learned to do is I kind of have different lessons or sessions we go through, and one of them is centered on hobbies and the out of office, out of work lifestyle. Because it seems like outside of work we get so many opportunities of things we could do, even in the midst of like recording these interviews in this series. I've been asked on certain hobbies, and opportunities, can you do this? And then I say yes immediately. And then I'm thinking, I should have learned from my own podcast, that I've got to be better at saying no, but there's just so many opportunities. So talk to me a little bit, and we'll start with you this time, Kim, how you manage life outside of BFR. How do you think about that?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's one I give a lot of thought to, because just like any other responsibility, it can just start to consume more and more of your life. So, a lot of times speaking opportunities are outside of business hours, and, coming to visit this church or that group, or, the next thing you know, your whole weekend is, consumed, and you're doing out of hours tours, and, you haven't even been home. And in my case, washed dishes or done laundry or visited with my husband the way that I should or want to. So it's a great question. And I think you have to be, again, very sure about where your priorities lie. And, I'm that person, just like you said, Patrick, if somebody says, hey, let's go to lunch, or let's do this, or let's have a girls' weekend, the first thing out of my mouth is going to be, yes, it sounds great. I'll jump in first and ask questions later. So for me, it's been, the word really is self-discipline. And that's a hard one, and one that I don't like, but it's just part of our Christian maturity. It's me growing in my walk with Christ to be mature enough to say no, not feeling like, I'm going to get left out of all the fun. Well, they still love me and I still love them, but I just can't do that in this season right now. So, because I'll fail in the things that matter most. So, it's just having those tough conversations with yourself, looking at your calendar. Again, so much of life, you'd hate to say, but it goes back to the calendar. What I put on there is what's going to happen most likely. And so another thing for me is margin around that same space. That kid that used to love to color out, outside the margin from one edge of the page to the next, until it bled over into my desk. And so it's hard not to live that way, but then I'm mad at myself when I do, because there's always something that comes up, that you wish you had time for, or, so again, I think it's just self-discipline for me in my case. And it's being okay that although you may have this many friends and this many things you would love to do, knowing that you can really only do life with a few. And that's hard. But it's the model that Jesus gave us. I think you just talked about this from the pulpit, Patrick. And I was like, he is so on target, because, he had the 72 and he had the masses, but then he had the 12 and then he had the 3 and then he had the 1. And so just kind of resting in, these are my people for this season, and this is who God's given me. And so I don't have to be everywhere for everybody. And, again.
Yeah. And maybe pride drives that sometimes. A point to be made is the only person that can be there for everyone is God.
That's right.
And so, and then, what was Satan's fall generated by? I will be like the Most High.
Yes.
So maybe we don't realize it behind the veil. Sometimes there's that pride monster there.
Yes.
That I can be like the Most High. I can do it all, experience it all, feel it all, know everyone, and you can't.
You can't.
I think one of the most helpful things for me sometimes is when I travel, and I've traveled with Jeff before, your husband, Kim, and just getting an airport or an international city, or I like to go to sporting events and go to a college football game where there's 100,000 people there, and I'm the stoic in the stands. I'll start thinking, all these people here and I know no one except for my 2 boys. And this is just a smattering of humanity.
Yeah.
Or this large city, if I'm in Rome or Paris with Jeff, and millions and millions of people, and I don't know one person here. You know, we're just so small, and we have to keep that in mind. You know, you mentioned the idea of fear, and you mentioned a fear, you know, lately there's been jargon to kind of brand this fear of missing out,
Right.
FOMO, fear of missing out. And so that's a big thing that we've got to be okay with missing the lunch appointment, missing the golf course invitation, missing the whatever it is you get invited to. Right. I think another way to look at that is to remember fear of missing out can make you miss out on something that's much more important, and that is your sanity, your rest, etc. But maybe on top of the fear of missing out, we instead of just FOMO, we could add FOM, and that's fear of man. Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man brings a snare, but the one who trusts in the Lord is safe. So sometimes it's hard to say no because we are afraid, and this gets back to pride, what people think about us, letting people down. Do you have any, Kim, nice ways of telling people no? You're such a nice person. Do you have a real sugary, sweet way of telling people no?
If it's the truth, I want to try to speak truth. I would love to do that. I absolutely, and I'm so thankful that you asked, but I just, right now, I don't know that I could do a good job at that, or I wish I could. You know, I would love to. Maybe we can talk in a couple of months, or we can circle back, but, you know, just appreciating the fact that you were included and thought of. I mean, it always is meaningful, you know, when people think to include us on whatever, and showing that gratitude. But like you said, Patrick, not everything you're asked to do, you're not able to do everything you're asked to do in every season. So it's using that wisdom. But I think gratitude is important. You know, Thank you for thinking of me. Wow, I appreciate that. I just, unfortunately, I can't do that right now. But
that's good. Glenn, we're going to talk to you about priorities outside of work, but I want to unpack one other thing here, or comment a little bit more on one other thing that Kim talked about, and that is you mentioned the word margin, you know, and this was a new concept for me as I kind of read and studied for this podcast and this series. I think I'd probably heard of it, but I don't think I fully grasped it. Margin is this idea that we allow room around all this stuff. You know, we have edges.
Right.
And I've been really bad at this, that I'll pack one meeting after another all day and not realize, number one, I need a little bit of buffer in between to kind of let the pressure valve release. But also there's always going to be urgent stuff that comes up or more stuff that comes up. And if you don't allow for margin, then you're going to be living at a breakneck speed, because where do you put the extra if there's no margin in your schedule? So anything you would add on that, either one of you?
It made me think of, and I'll probably get this wrong, but there was a Greek god named Kronos.
Time, it's a Greek word for time.
Yes. And the picture in my book was him like ripping the head off of one of his kids. Like he's just, time is like marching, kind of like what you just said. And I am drained by meetings. I sitting still, looking at the same people for an hour.
We'll keep this under an hour, I promise.
I can't do that back to back to back, like you said. I've got to schedule sometime in there, if nothing else, just to get in the car and drive down the road 5 minutes. But Kairos time is the other option, and that's time that's like full of opportunity. It's full of fulfillment. It's purpose-driven. So there's two different ways to look at time. But for me, and I don't know if it's okay if I answer that question about
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Priorities, it's a balance. It's really funny because when I went to college, I thought, I don't want any friends. I don't want any extracurricular activities. I don't want to go to church. I just want to finish. I just want to get through this, because I was not a good student in high school. So I was really concerned about that. And I was miserable. So about, I don't know, 3 years into college, I decided I'm going to have some fun. So I joined a club, it was a water ski club. I joined a fraternity. I went out on 1 or 2 dates the whole time I was there. But I had much more joy in my life, much more productivity. I actually went to church too. And then the same thing happened when I got out of college and I went to work. I said the same thing. I said,
You didn't learn your lesson.
I did not. I'm not going to have friends. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to do anything fun because I just want to pay my dues and get to a spot to where I can do that. And it was really funny. One of my college roommates walked into the store after we graduated a year and a half before, and he said, "You look awful." And, you know, you don't have the tan that you had in college after you worked. So I was just chalking it up to that. And then I looked in the mirror and there's these dark circles under my eyes and I'm pale and I'm not exercising. So, you know, I didn't realize it. But if I stay balanced, if I put, you know, my spiritual life as a priority, if I put exercise as a priority, if I put rest as a priority,
Yes.
I am actually better and I get more accomplished during the time I'm at work than if I work, you know, 10 or 15 hours a day, whatever. I don't do that. But whatever time I was spending was less productive because I thought if I got all those other things off my plate, I could be more at work, and it's just not true.
There's a little rhyme about that, isn't there? All work, no play,
Absolutely.
something like that.
Makes Glenn a dull boy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say one thing, Patrick, because with Glenn Harris, my friend to the left, we used to be neighbors many years ago and consider them such dear friends. But his wife, Susie, was the first person that ever shared the concept of margin with me. And I've never forgotten it. So, Susie, if you're listening, kudos to you. You taught me so much 20 plus years ago. And yeah, because some people I had just never thought about that, the need for balance, for margin. And I remember her saying when we were both having our babies and trying to find 5 minutes, and she's like, it's okay to read a magazine. It's okay to pick up your Southern Living, because I didn't realize it, but evidently grew up in an environment where if I wasn't working and being productive, I felt like that was lazy. And so, you know, sometimes we don't realize we've got these mindsets or misconceptions, but Susie was so awesome to help me go, hey, yeah, it's okay for me to pick up a magazine. I can rest my mind. I can have some downtime. And it's okay. But it's amazing how many people really don't think that's true.
Yeah, they don't. And it's kind of bred into our society. I think it kind of goes back to the Henry Ford production line model. Like that's become American life. Like we're machines. Performance, productivity is the name of the game. And we actually feel guilty if we're not performing and producing. You know, we have a mutual friend in Joe Karp who has a ministry where plays basketball with guys and has a Bible study. And I remember him sharing about a young man who was kind of at a breaking point and said, you know, I had this dad growing up who would often tell me if he walked through the living room and I was sitting down, because my dad wanted me to, saw my basketball talent, wanted me to be a basketball star. If I was just on the couch, he would say, somebody's getting better than you. You could be doing something. You could be improving right now. And he said, it took me until now to realize that's not a good mindset to have. You know, it's okay to loaf on the couch, right? And to relax. It's just about that balance and keeping in the proper perspective. And thanks be to God that he, right after he commissioned Adam and Eve to work, he rested. Genesis 1:26-31 is the commission to work. And then he rests in Genesis 2:1-3 to show that we need rest. There's an old saying, if you don't come apart every once in a while, you'll end up coming apart. So that's really good. Anything else you would add about margin? You know, what does that look like for you practically to kind of make that margin in your schedule and in your life?
Am I go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's good to have a place where you kind of unwind, you know, and for Jeff and I, it's kind of on our back porch. I mean, weather permitting. I mean, it's kind of a covered space, which is nice, but it doesn't happen every day, but it's really nice at the end of the day. Like he knows that I'm coming home, or I know he's coming home, and that we're just going to have that time to just sort of exhale. I might grab out some cheese and crackers, or we might just, you know, sit there and talk, catch up on our day. And it just seems like that it may just be 15, 20, if we've got time, it might be an hour just to sit there and kind of decompress. And that's kind of where we sort
Need
of,
that.
we need that so bad. I mean, we all need that, whoever it is you're connecting with, your spouse, your children. And so we kind of have set that as like a rhythm. I mean, it's not that it happens every day, but I think if you can have those places of rest that you look forward to, like, okay, I'm going to press through this meeting because in an hour and a half, I'm going to be on the back porch and we can just relax and we can, I think for me anyway, it helps me to think, all right, we're going to have that time built in at the end of the day. So let's just get things done that need to get done. And it's just something to look forward to. And I think it's a sweet way to appreciate what's happened during the day and reflect back. So that's just one sort of space that we share together.
Good.
For me, I think of the word recreate is recreate.
Wow.
I think all day long you're pouring out. And if you don't take time to relax, I can recreate walking at 4:30 in the morning or going to the gym. There's lots of different ways. I don't have to be on the couch, but it does have to be away from work.
Yes. That's a good point. That part of the recreation and rest can be a multitude of things. It's really getting out of that rhythm that is your normal work. I had a friend when I was going through a difficult time and I needed to learn some of these principles. He said, you've got to do stuff that is you're in control and it's not in control of you, to where you're adding value to yourself, whether that's on the couch, going for a run, playing a musical instrument, reading a magazine, whatever that is. The question is it pouring into you or are you pouring out? That's where the recreate comes. Glenn, you said something earlier I want to go back to, talking about priorities, and you kind of were the dog returning to its vomit, Hey, and I tease you because, man, been there, done that, still struggling with that.
Yeah.
But, the idea of priorities, and I had this guy when I was young, was trying to help me think through priorities. And he said, I want to give you something that's going to kind of wreck your world. And he said, he had me list out, what do you think your most important priorities are? Give me 5. And just for our listeners, when you read on this topic, they say you can only have 4 to 5 priorities tops. Beyond that, you're overextending yourself. But he said, list out 5, and I put my relationship with God number 1. That's the spiritual thing you're supposed to do, right? Yeah. Like, you're not going to catch me on that. I'm going to get that right. So number 2, I had my relationship with my wife. Number 3 was maybe work. And number 4 was relationship with other family. And then the last one was rest and recreation. And he said, I want you to note that you've put them in a sequential order here. And that's how we're taught to think about priorities. But sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. Or sometimes, so he kind of reversed it and put it in all this different order to say, sometimes what you need more than praying is to sleep.
Yeah.
Or sometimes unwinding by, if it's watching a ball game or going for a nature walk, that may be the more important in that given moment than work. So I think that perhaps could be helpful for our listeners, as you think about your purpose and priorities, that we sometimes get so rigid and we keep one thing at the top of the list. And that might indicate that things become a little bit of an idol and then we're thinking incorrectly. Anything you'd say about that, add to that, expand on that?
This might be controversial, but I'll say it and then you can reply. But I think if you're balanced and you're recreating, then you have the flexibility to go where you need to go. Does that make sense? I remember one day we had closed for a month and we were reopening, and the folks that were doing the work all got sick at the last minute. So we opened the store with no shelves, and I worked 17 hours that day.
Wow.
Building shelves and reorganizing. And I didn't feel emotionally drained. I was physically drained, but because I was healthy from a soul standpoint, like I said, it wasn't it wasn't drudgery to me. Not, I don't want to do 17-hour days.
Yeah, you want to come back and do it the next day and the next day.
No, but it could be the opposite. It could be you worked a couple of hard days and you need to just take a day off. And, but I think you need to go where I guess the Spirit leads you. I heard, I think his name is Wayne Cordeiro. He's a pastor in Hawaii. He called it the principle of the fulcrum. Have you ever seen this?
I haven't. He's got the book Running on Empty,
Yes.
I think, or something like that.
Yeah. So he has this, he's got a finger and he's got this stick, and he's like, most people want to stay perfectly balanced. Like family over here, work over here. Everybody is just where I want them. Nobody move. And that's just not life.
Yeah,
so he said, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, Holy Spirit, I'm going to grab this end of the stick. And maybe I need to move towards my family and not forget about work, but not as big of a priority because the Holy Spirit's leading me that way. Or maybe I do need to spend more time at work. So I think it's got to go both ways, but you have to be healthy or you don't hear those signals. You don't get that word.
Yeah.
Or you feel guilty. You guilt yourself into thinking, well, this can't be right. I didn't get my 8 hours in.
Right.
So I love that, Glenn. Yeah.
Good stuff. Anything you would add to that, Kim?
Well, I just think Glenn's exactly right. It's not, I don't think the key is ever that we lead these balanced lives. I mean, you're always going to be doing more of something than something else. It seems, and so I think, again, just being in tune with the Holy Spirit, being okay with that and recognizing that the things that we love require different amounts of our time in different seasons, or more or less of us. And so, and I think knowing how to listen for that is a huge part of what energizes us and fills us so that we don't feel drained. But, not like there aren't those days where you're exhausted and tired and can get frustrated. And then I think, and you may be wanting to talk about this, I think it's important at some point to talk about what are the red flags. Like, when do you know you need to make some shifts in how you're spending your time?
Talk about that a little bit more. What does that look like? And have you all experienced that? Have you had the red flags on the beach where you said, can't get in the water, need to make a change?
Absolutely. But Glenn, I feel like you're bursting to speak on that, but
it comes out in my driving habits. I just
road rage,
driving too close, or the person behind me is offending me because they're too close, or the person beside me. And it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
It's almost like somebody's driving a pin down between my shoulder blades.
Yeah.
It's paralyzing. And it hasn't happened to me in a long time, but it used to be. I would just work until my body basically said, you're not going anymore.
Yes.
So those are, I don't know why I just laughed inside. I'm sorry.
No,
but I have lots of my wife is a very good indicator of when I need to chill. But I don't treat people the way I want to, especially when I'm in the car. I don't know why that's the big deal.
We've all got those. We've all got the warning signs on the dashboard of our lives. One of my good friends, and we talk just about each week and practice accountability. But he said, last week I was out cutting the grass, and about an hour after cutting grass, while I was cutting grass, I realized this entire time I've just been thinking about everybody in the world I'm mad at and how everybody's let me down and what I'd like to do and how I'd like to get even. And he's like, that's an indicator I probably need to chill out, and I need some time off and I need to regroup. And there's probably some dysfunction and stuff is out of balance in an unhealthy way.
I would add, for me, it's a spirit of dread, the thought of dread. Like if I get up and I'm just like, I'm just dreading fill in the blank, whatever, 3 meetings back to back, or having to make all these decisions, or we're going through our policy and procedure. I just dread. If I find myself in my head using the word dread, over and over, then that's a big red flag. I'm like, wait a minute, God's not calling me into a life of drudgery and dreading everything. So I must be feeling really overloaded. What can I do to step away and refresh? I mean, it doesn't have to mean a week of vacation. It can be a walk, at 8:00 at night, just taking a walk around the neighborhood and just totally decompressing and, pouring out whatever has been building up to the Lord that you just hadn't had time to talk to him about that day. It can be something that simple. But I think it's important, because if not, like you said, Glenn, we find ourselves, or I find myself not wanting to respond in the way I rush. I'm rushing the next conversation. I'm rushing the next person. I'm rushing the next thing. And I'm not slowing down, and I'm not processing what the conversation I just had. And then I'm going into another conversation. It's like, I'm missing, okay, wait a minute. I'm missing what God is trying to say to me, through me. I didn't encourage that person because I was just blowing past the conversation so I could get to that. So I think, you start losing that sense of purpose and hearing from the Lord when you start living in that space, or for me. And so it can sometimes start with that feeling of dread or being overwhelmed. So just kind of red flags.
That's good. You got to be able to recognize those. And sometimes the red flags are going off and we're miserable, but we don't recognize them as red flags. We don't realize what we've done to our own selves, to our own soul. We don't see busyness as the culprit. I've been there before. And then Satan can really do a number on us at that moment. It gets us thinking that it's us, that we're weak, you can't handle it, you can't do it, you're crazy, you need help. And reality is we're finite creatures, and when we push ourselves beyond our limits for too long, we're going to experience these symptoms.
Yeah.
And we've just got to be able to recognize them, reorient ourselves, get back to our purpose and our priorities.
It's good.
It's all good stuff. Really helpful. So here's a statement that you find when you read some Christian literature on busyness, and it's this statement Kevin DeYoung makes when he says in his book, Crazy Busy, great book, we'd recommend it, not all busyness is bad.
Right.
So, we've mentioned this in our podcast, that we kind of have a paradox in our society, that in one way we're a very busy society, but then in another way there's some who seem to fall into the opposite ditch on the other side of the road of idleness or laziness. So how do you embrace rest while fighting against the opposite? What does that look like? And, you both likely in your line of work see people where it's like, hey, you could say, get with the program. They're not struggling with busyness.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the question, because it definitely is something that we see sometimes at Bartow Family Resources, where we always say if we're working harder than our clients are to find a job or to make progress, then it's time to sort of step back. And it can be frustrating, but also knowing that, not to get off into all this, but if people have been through trauma brain is real, and sometimes they don't process information and stress the way a normal healthy brain would or person would. And so there's having patience in that. But yeah, and I think sometimes stress and pressure, it's relative. A particular client comes to my mind, and she had like one thing on her calendar that day, and she was just so stressed.
Wow.
But she felt as stressed about that one thing, that one appointment that she needed to get to, as I did about the 10 or 20 things, and so was my stress any greater than hers? Well, I can't say that it was. She was very, very distressed. So, I think in ministry roles, you're, or as believers, we're extending grace to others. It's not, to your point, Patrick, get with the program. Let's go. You're really dragging around here, but we don't know what's in another person's heart and soul and mind, and the weight they're carrying. And so,
and what the backstory is.
What the backstory, exactly. The trauma and abuse that she had been through, it made sense why she was overwhelmed with one thing. So, I think we just, again, know thyself. We have to know what our own levels of healthy look like, because it is different for different people based on, the load that you can carry. And I do think the Lord teaches and grows us and stretches us and, all those things. But we have to be careful that we're not taking what our standard of busy or our standard of production is and putting that on others, even with our children, because they're all wired differently.
You want me to tell you what I'm thinking?
Sure, that's the purpose of this.
Yes.
So the same guy, Wayne Cordeiro, had us list 5 things that fill your cup and 5 things that drain your cup. So I list all the things that I love to do, things I hate to do. And he goes, now I want you to ask your spouse the same question, but don't be surprised when it's just your list flipped.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
Yes.
like my wife
Yes.
would love to sit on the beach and read a book and just listen to the waves.
Yes.
And I can't stand that. That drives me absolutely crazy. So I do think in our marriage, we figure it out now. I need a paddleboard, a kayak, a jet ski, a something, and she can sit there and read a book all day long. I just need to be active. But when we first got married, I would just sit there and just be miserable. And she didn't care if I was sitting there or not. I was just trying to be respectful of her. So I think that there's a lot of learning about what refuels you and what doesn't. But I have probably struggled with rest. When I say rest, like I don't struggle with sleep, but taking the right amount of time to rest. And the same guy that I referenced to said, you need to look at your calendar for the year and you need to put rest in the middle of your most stressful times. Wow. Like book it ahead of time. Like if you know,
That's good.
And I'm sure in the church world, there's, first of the year is always huge for y'all. So it'd be really important for you to be rested up before you get to that or sometime in the middle of that. And it's countercultural, but it's like sharpening the saw, If you just keep sawing, it's going to take 10 times the effort and you're not going to get half as far.
Yeah, busy people and people living with purpose, and I mean the good type of busyness, because there's good busyness. Right. I mean, we want to busy ourselves in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way. That's the point of this podcast here. But the truth is that if people who are busy in a healthy way pursuing their purpose don't carve out that time ahead of time, many times there's going to be a temptation that I don't really need it. And there's a reason perhaps in the Old Testament you see all these seasons and these cycles prescribed. The Lord knows you need to have forethought and to pre-plan, to have time to celebrate the closing of one season and anticipate the opening of a new season.
That's good.
Well, let's go back to something you mentioned earlier. You used the word, Kim, a few times, seasons. And I think this is a big part of busyness, is that there's rhythms to life. Yes. There are the literal seasons, fall or autumn, winter, spring, summer. Glad I got all those right. Then there's the figurative seasons, football, and baseball, basketball, the sports seasons. There's the seasons of life too. And you can think of that like calendar, when you've got kids, you've got the summer break, you've got winter break, you've got whatever, but then so you can think of that kind of calendar and the rhythm of the year. You could think of the events, as a pastor, I'm thinking about the rhythm of our year. We have seasons, where you have the summer with vacation Bible school and camps, and you've got Christmas with the concerts and Christmas Eve service, etc. So we have seasons in that regard, but then you also have like the seasons of life that go throughout the course of this life the Lord gives you, The Psalm 90 says the span of our life is 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. So the Lord kind of tells us, our days are numbered, but under most circumstances, 70 to 80 years. How do you think about those seasons of life, and what counsel would you give to others? It took me, I'm slow to the party here, just catching on. My wife had the small kids, and we don't realize we're in a season. And we're like, life is really hard. We didn't know adulting would be so hard. And then we hit that first, time in that new season, like, wow, we can go out to a restaurant and actually eat in public again, and have kids sit here and act halfway civilized. Now we're in a new season where they're all teenagers and they're getting cars and driving. And there's a lot of, we are official emotional processors now. For teenagers, and we have people a little bit further down the road that are just saying, just wait, when you get out of this season, empty nesting is wonderful.
Yeah.
There's different perspectives on that.
Yeah.
But what would you say about that? What kind of words of advice, your experiences with those seasons of life?
You want to go, Glenn? Or-
And how does that play into this whole busyness conversation?
Yeah, it's really funny. I just I listened to a podcast and I'm reading a book by Levi Lesko. It's called "Blessed Are the Spiraling." But I also listened to John Eldredge has got a new book, and they're both. The main topic in both books is this exact subject that you're talking about. And one of them calls the first stage, like for a guy, would be you're a warrior, you're a warrior. And then at the end of your life, you're a sage. And I don't remember all the steps in between, but I know for me, I have tried to be a warrior in my stage that I am right now, because I remember how much fun that was and how much God was using me and how I just knew everything about everybody, and I had my hands on everything. I had really good control. and that's just not where I'm at now. I can't do it at the stage of the business. I have to trust people to be who I was. I have to trust these 20-something-year-olds to be the warriors in the business now. But I think a lot of people are trying to live in the wrong season. It's kind of like the guy that's got the mullet haircut, you know.
He didn't get the memo. Yeah.
It's kind of like Napoleon Dynamite. Who's the uncle? Like, I think I can throw the ball over that mountain.
Yes.
Mikey, you can give us input on that.
Yeah.
Uncle Rico, okay.
It'd be just like Satan to try to trick you into thinking, no, you're not supposed to be in that stage. You need to go back there and try to, you know, kill yourself like you did when you were in your 20s. And my body just won't do it. You know, like I said, I've been forced into having to trust people more, having to really kick me out of stage into another stage, instead of it just accepting it and embracing it and enjoying it.
Right.
You're going to say something now. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, and that requires wisdom. You know, wisdom
exactly.
is not knowledge. We know that. It's the ability to see a situation and to know the wisest or best thing, the right thing to do in that given situation. So that's some sage advice. A lot of people are trying to live in the wrong stage of life. That's a good one-liner.
Yeah.
That is good, Glenn. That's so good. Yeah. Well, yeah, and just to underscore your point, I think it's that wisdom in knowing. And I think I can't speak to how it plays out for men other than my own husband and what we shared in that experience. But I think I'll just speak a moment just to the women out there. I think that for those of us that are moms, there's a grief that we go through when those stages shift that our husbands don't necessarily experience, because we're the nurturer usually. You know, with the caregiver, the one that's, you know, taking care of all the things. And even though it may drive us crazy, it gives us such purpose and fulfillment that when it's gone, it's almost like, oh my gosh, that's gone. And so I think, you know, there's a disparity there between what men might feel in those seasons with your children if you're a mom or a dad. But I think it's, to your point, Glenn, just embracing, you know, okay, well, my children don't need me like they used to, but guess what? I can be friends with them now. And I used to that was
Kind of flip the script on your thinking. Yeah.
Right. You just got to think, oh, embrace this. This is beautiful. I mean, we can have a dinner date with our boys and their girlfriend, or, you know, our oldest son's wife. It's so fun to go out and you know, and it's just so cool. And so rather than being sad about how they don't need me for this or don't need me for that, you know, it's beautiful. I think it's just exciting because God has good things in every season. Good things that we have yet to experience. I think if we think all, you know, the good old days, the glory days, you know, are all behind us, no, God has got great things. I mean, you know, one of the most vibrant, amazing women I ever knew was my mentor, and she was in her 80s. And every day when I would talk to her, not that I talked to her every day, but every time I picked up the phone and called to check on her, she would say, let me tell you what God taught me today. Wow. And I never want to forget that. I was so inspired by her, you know. He's always teaching us new things. And just because if we see the seasons shifting, it doesn't mean all the leaves are going to fall off the tree and it's all sad. It could just be new fruit is about to come forth, you know, and get excited about that.
That's good.
Somebody said when you're young, you're building your container. In middle of the life, you're filling your container. And then, not that I'm at the end, but I'm at the last quarter. You're emptying your container. You're pouring out to other people.
Yeah,
and if
good.
you can see that, like,
it's a gift.
like this 80-year-old that's pouring spiritual truth to you, that's what's going to fulfill her and help you.
Absolutely.
But if you're trying to go back and do stuff that you were doing 40 years ago, you're not helping anybody.
That's right. It's good.
That's great. That's great. It's such a key, seeing the stages, being discerning, the wisdom to know the stages and seasons of life, and your purpose may shift, see it from a different angle.
Yes.
I appreciate what you said to the women. That's spot on. With just the other night, Laura she gets on her computer, and we've had iPhones for most of our kids' lives, so we've got thousands of pictures, where my mom has like a handful from,
Right,
when I was growing up. But she was looking at one picture, and it was at a McDonald's playground, and it was Will. He's climbing out of the little, the playground, and she said, "Oh, I miss that so much." And I said, "I can still smell the poop from that day. I remember changing that diaper." So it's so spot on, So that's a big thing for couples,
Yes.
Not only do we have to deal with our own issues, like myself, like Patrick, I've got to, at 46 now, I'm starting to feel like if I'm not becoming an older guy in society, I'm about there. So, when I'm out in public, I was flying this past week and seeing like most of the people on this plane are probably older than me. So I'm dealing with my own identity and my own phases and stages. But then my wife is doing the same thing, but in a different way.
Yes. Yeah.
So then this plays out in the stage of marriage and family relationships as well.
Yeah.
Good deal. So just great stuff. I really appreciate y'all sharing. Y'all have really given some stuff I think that'll be really helpful and edifying for our listeners out there. Any last golden nuggets, any pieces of advice you would share for those seeking to find their purpose?
He's looking at me. I don't know.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to be on, Patrick. I mean, again, for me, I would just say, take the next step. What's the next thing? You're looking for purpose. You're wanting to know, God, how can you use me? There's a reason that he says he's a lamp unto our feet, a light unto our path. It's one step, you don't know where that path may lead. So it's trust, back to what you said earlier. It's just trusting God, enjoy that relationship, the journey, put your yes out there. Is scary. I know we didn't have time to talk about all that and all of this, but sometimes it can be scary. But just trusting and taking the next step, as small as it may seem, do it.
And let him direct your paths.
Right.
Yeah.
The kind of the lingo nowadays is, what's your story? Tell me about your story, but it's like, let God write your story. That's another way of saying that, let him direct your paths.
Right. Yeah.
I have a friend that says, God gives me one step and I go running off in the darkness.
Yeah, that's right.
That's easy to do sometimes. But yeah.
The thing that has impacted me the most is this book I read called Soul Keeping, and it's John Ortberg, the author, and he's asking his mentor, Dallas Willard, how do I grow spiritually? And he says, you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And he goes, got it. What's the next one? You need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Because it seems really simple, but when you really get down to it, if every decision is a spiritual decision and you got to put all this balance and margin in there, there's a big difference. I think most people live a hurried life.
Yeah.
And if you can get rid of that, I think you're in much better shape to do the things that God has purposed for you.
Yeah, that's a great statement from Willard. Willard's passed away now. I had to read his book, The Divine Conspiracy. I got to read his book, The Divine Conspiracy, in seminary. But he made that statement, and then there's a book out there by that title. That's a pretty good book on the ruthless elimination of hurry.
It's good. I just read it over the holidays.
Yes.
John Mark Comer. So
yes.
good.
Yeah, that's a good one. And so you reference, perhaps we can get these in the show notes, Micah, Soul Keeping by John Ortberg, and then Wayne Cordeiro.
He has that book called Dead Leader Running.
Okay.
And he spoke at a leadership conference at Willow Creek, and it was the most requested talk that since they've been doing it, because it's all pastors and nobody had ever had anybody speak to pastors just literally run out of gas.
Yeah, I think he's got Dead Leader Running, and I think he's got Running on Empty as a book as well. So okay, we'll get those. We'll get those for our listeners. You know, we had Dick Forbes in part 1 with episode 1 in our interview, and I know recently I was talking to him about a friend who was struggling and was asking his advice, and he said, "You've just really tough time in life. You've got to get him reading some good stuff, renewing the mind."
Yes.
You know, and when it comes to busyness, I don't think I can recommend it enough. You know, that if we can read some good material on this, good solid Christian material, can really renew our minds, our thinking.
So good.
Sometimes that's what we got to do. We've got to reprogram our operating system, so to speak, because there's there are soul reasons. Dick talked about that in his interview. There are soul reasons, all types of reasons that we embrace busyness. It's seductress. We should know better, right?
Right.
It's not going to pan out or pay off.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times heart reasons, and
It's funny, when I was reading the book Soul Keeping, my wife said, what is going on with you? Because you're a better husband reading this book. So I just kept reading it. I read it like 6 times before I put it down, because I was like, I'm afraid I'm going to slide back.
Yeah. That's great. Well, good deal. Well, thank you for those recommendations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You know,
for
I had a
having us.
mentor one time told me busy people rule the world. You know, I don't know if that's healthy or true, but I know you're both busy people, busy in a good way, and like all of us, struggle at times with the tension of being busy in an unhealthy way. Yeah. But I know you're busy in a good and healthy way with the great work the Lord's entrusted you with. And thank you so much for giving us a small portion of your time here to share. And we hope for our listeners that you find this as helpful and edifying. Remember to subscribe, like, and share the Declutter podcast, and make sure you join us for our next episode.